Here's another Ford Cabover I have. Well, this one's obviously just a parts cab, but it does have the perfect matching front steer axle for me to use on my heavy haul toter home project. And I'll pair it up with the other steer axle I already pulled off of the other Ford Cabover that we're using for parts for the toter home build. And they'll be a perfect identical pair. And then we'll have a twin steer setup. So let's work on pulling this off. Now the bushings on the front of these leaf springs, I bet are going to be a pain to press out. So I'm going to start off with ripping out this old damaged radiator too, just so we can have better access towards the top. So we can work at them from the top and bottom and try to get these leaf springs removed. Ta-da! And that's how you gracefully pull a radiator. So now here are the pins I'm hoping we can press out. I'm hoping to get a hydraulic ram in here pushing on it. There you can see it there. And these are clamped in with these two bolts to where that bolt tightens this bracket on this. So let me loosen that bolt so that this will ungrip that pin and hopefully it'll start moving. Alright, change of plans, because I was already really dreading trying to push out these leaf spring pins because they're almost certainly going to be very tight in there. But I couldn't even get past these tightening bolts that clamp on that pin. Even these were just seized. Since it's such a long bolt through this housing, it's all corroded and everything's too bound up in there. So after a little bit more thinking, I've decided that I don't really care about bringing this leaf spring on into my future. And I'll go with a suspension design that doesn't reuse any part of this leaf spring. So we still need the axle, and we're just going to tackle these U-bolts clamping the axle to the leaf spring, because that should go a lot smoother than trying to tackle these pins. Another weird thing about this truck is it has an aftermarket power steering assist ram back there that's actually pneumatic. It's air powered, and somehow this addition here senses when you're trying to turn left or right, it will plumb air pressure to this giant piston back there to help with power steering. So kind of an interesting system. Definitely not something I want to try to keep working, so I'm just going to cut it all off, as I would much rather just have hydraulic steering assist rather than this pneumatic system. I've never seen that before though. It is kind of neat. Alright, I'm going to try to undo the rest of these U-bolts. I kind of have the excavator lifted up on the back end, and this jack stand's taking a little bit of weight up here. However, on the back, the only way I could rig it up puts a lot of strain on a chain and the cross member that the chain is wrapped around. So I don't know if it's actually going to be able to cantilever this whole truck up, but hopefully it's able to once it doesn't have to lift this axle anymore. Alright, that didn't go smooth at all. As you can see, it was very hard to grab a hold of the back of this frame. But eventually we dragged it out of the shop without wrecking too much. All of these holes and damage was already done to this cab, so we didn't even get into the cab too bad, but I don't care about this cab anyways. And I probably should have just removed this axle with this outside of the shop, since we couldn't get the excavator boom over top with the roof of the shop. But now that it's dragged out here, I can move it around really easily by grabbing it like we did this other cab over cab. Here's Ron's truck. It had a check engine light pop up, but then it went away. But I'm going to plug my scanner into it anyways and see if we can learn anything. I'm going to use this scanner made by Carly, which is a super convenient unit that connects to my phone via Bluetooth, and Carly is a sponsor of today's video. Carly's scanner and app allows us to access manufacturer level diagnostics, coding customization, and access to hidden information inside your car. Carly will help give you a detailed report on your car's health to help you troubleshoot issues and understand your car better, and allow you to make informed decisions on maintenance and repairs to your car. So a small investment into buying a Carly scanner can save you a ton of money by avoiding being overcharged by mechanics. It makes it so that a check engine light doesn't always have to mean a trip to the shop. I just plug this scanner into the OBD2 port, and then we'll start this truck up. And then I'll connect the Carly app to the scanner, and then we'll initiate a full diagnostic scan of the truck. All right, Carly was actually able to detect 9 issues with this truck, although it looks like it's just limited to some body control module hiccups and something to do with the radio as well. So it doesn't look like it's anything that's threatening to being able to drive this thing around. But regardless, I'll go ahead and clear all these codes, and then we can check back later to see if anything popped back up. You can get the Carly app for free and use the free basic version to diagnose your car and see what issues it may have. And beyond that, you can pay for the upgraded versions that unlock more features as well. The available functions may vary a little bit from car to car based on your make and model, and you can check on Carly's website to learn about what nuanced features are available for your car. Another feature that I love is the live data function, which will feed you real-time gauge values and give you a more detailed look at how your engine's behaving. This will come in handy for my little parts running car here, because the coolant temperature gauge on the dash said the car got pretty hot climbing a hill the other day. And Carly is able to read the ECM real time and get all these little detailed measurements of the engine. However, because this gauge is just a needle that vaguely moves between a range of hot and cold, I can now reference Carly on my phone, and that'll give me an exact temperature number. So with that amount of detail, I can know if the engine is actually running too hot or if it's running fine. So to learn more about Carly and enjoy a discount, just click the link in the description below and use my code Goodrich to get 15% off your Carly order. And thank you, Carly, for sponsoring today's video. Alright, here's my old reliable Ford Cabover. It has a 13-speed transmission, except one of the splitters is barely working to where I can only kind of get it into its high range and it just spits out of its low range. So the way a 13-speed transmission works is you have your main gearbox controlled by the stick that you move with your hand. So there's 5 speeds there, and then you have 2 air actuated high and low gearboxes. So just 2-speed, 2-speed, 5-speed. And combining all those gear ratios together, you can get 13 unique gear ratios. So with those 2 air-actuated 2-speed transmissions, you have your high-low range and you have your splitter, which splits the gears in half. But that one's not working in the sense that I can only barely get it to stick in the high range, to where I basically lose 12th gear, 10th gear, and 8th gear. Which hasn't been the end of the world, because a lot of semis just run a 10-speed transmission. So the way I've been driving this truck is kind of similar to what a 10-speed would operate anyways. However, having a working splitter to split those upper gears is really helpful to keep your engine in a sweet spot and keep the whole rig operating as optimized as possible up hills or in any sort of situation. So I have an upcoming haul I need to make. They'll put us right at about 80,000 pounds overall, and it'd really be nice to have those splitting gears. So I'm going to tear out this transmission and try to swap in another transmission I have. Now here's the engine and transmission from the other Ford Cabover that we tore down. So my running Ford Cabover has a Cat 3406A. This one is a big cam Cummins, but I think they have exactly the same transmissions. So, and this engine and transmission has about half of the miles that are on my complete Ford Cabover. And we never took this particular truck for an actual test drive, but I did kind of test this transmission and shift through the gears, and it felt really good. So I think it's going to be a good candidate to swap in. I'm going to strap it up to my excavator bucket here, and we'll lift it on out of here. Just Gotta undo all the bell housing bolts. All the bolts are out, so now I think I should be able to just wiggle this thing out. There we go. So let's jack this cab up so we can get into removing that transmission. All right, let me get this exhaust out of here so we'll have more room to work with. And also, this jank side dump was never supposed to stay on here this long, so we're going to replace it with something a little bit better. I literally just slapped this on for the initial test drive because the original stack had rusted out, but then it turned into one of those things where it just kind of stuck around. And then a nice set of stacks is still rather expensive, so I'll just put together some pieces that I have laying around and we'll make one single mini stack for this. It'll be a little bit better. I'm pulling this drive line now, and I'll have to drop this carrier bearing to loosen everything up. I need to unbolt this cross member too, so we work on doing that. There's a bunch of bolts that'll probably be hard to get to. There we go. All right, because the engine and transmission is mounted at the very front of the engine and then right here on the other side, I'm going to lift the whole engine and transmission up, and then we'll have to block the engine up and then just remove the transmission. All right, these two transmissions do look exactly the same, so I think this new one will slide right in place. So let's get it installed. Alright, it's finally in there. Now I did have to actually remove these little cradles that these mounts sit into in order to get this bell housing to slide out. So let's work on fishing these back down in here somehow. Everything is a pretty tight fit with all this stuff. There we go. Alright, I just tried to take my cab over on the Maiden voyage with this new transmission to go get the load I've been needing to pick up. However, about 2 hours into the trip, my clutch went limp, so that was a bummer we lost that. It's a hydraulic clutch, which had been getting slowly worse and worse, but I thought it still functioned good enough for this last trip. Which, losing the clutch in a semi isn't the end of the world, since you're just floating through the gears anyways. So that's why I was able to just turn around and come home with no problem. But I really want my clutch for when I'm loaded down. And when the trailer's empty, it's not the end of the world to just start with the truck in gear with the engine off and then hit the starter and chug the engine along and start rolling, and then it fire off, and then you float through your gears the rest of the way there. But that's not going to be an effective method to limp around when I have a really heavy load on the trailer. And I think the issue is the master cylinder for the hydraulic system is tucked up under the dash, which I was hoping I could just pull that out of one of my other Ford Cabovers laying around, and hopefully that replacement would be good. But after pulling this master cylinder off one of my other Ford Cabovers and inspecting it, this one ended up being in pretty terrible shape too. Namely because there's a lot of crusty buildup on everything. So hopefully I'm able to clean it up. I've pretty much cleaned everything up. And then the rubber components are actually really soft and pliable and in good shape. So once all the crusty buildup is out of the system, I think this one will end up working well. I still have a little bit of cleanup to do. I don't know if you can see, but there's these little holes around here that allows the clutch fluid, the brake fluid is what it is, to pass through these chambers and get pressurized down the line. But all these holes were clogged up. So I have this little piece of welding wire with a bend in it so I don't blast through this little flexi plate that's there. So I've been working on pushing out this crusty buildup with this method. Just kind of work it around in there, and it pops through. You see all this funk that came out. And then there's also a bunch of buildup up in this gap behind this seal. So I cleaned all that out. And out of these 6 holes, this one more to go. That one punched through easily. And now that these parts are clean, we'll start putting it back together. First, this spring, and then this metal cap sits on top of the spring, and then goes this seal, which I'll go ahead and lube it up with brake fluid, because that's what this whole thing fills up with anyways. And let me lube up this plunger assembly, because it goes in next. And then this brass spacer with this push rod, this cap, and then the snap ring holds it all together. Alright, I got the new master cylinder mounted up in there. There wasn't much to film because it was so tight up in there, so you just have to take my word for it that that was a pain to get installed. But now, I got the clutch primed, and it performs better than it ever has before. It nearly immediately starts catching, and then we have the full range of motion. So now the clutch brake will also work a lot better these days. Okay, now I'm scheduled to make my haul with the semi-truck tomorrow, but in the meantime, we always have more axle teardown to do. So I got some time to kill. So here's a set of air ride axles, and I have a matching set over in the bushes over there that I'm about to go grab. And these axles will be combined for a tri-drive to go on the back of my heavy haul toter home. So let's go grab the other set and tear that down. Now I'll remove this intermediate axle from this axle set, and then we'll just abandon the rear axle because it's missing parts and we don't need it for anything anyways. We'll start with separating this drive line. Alright, it's finally freed up. This bolt is corroded in this aluminum housing and it's all stuck in there, so got this binder here trying to pull this bushing apart. But everything's gonna fight me with this stuff.